Winter came early that year. The trees turned bare, the sky softened to gray, and the cold wrapped itself around Maplewood like a quiet blanket. Clara didn't mind winter. She liked the stillness, the soft silence of snow falling outside the shop windows. What she hadn't expected was how warm her life had started to feel on the inside. James was still showing up more often now. He didn't just come to read. He stayed longer, helped with little things, fixing a shelf that wobbled, changing out a broken light bulb, carrying boxes from the back. He never acted like he was trying to prove anything. He just did things quietly, like he'd always been part of her world. One cold Tuesday, the heating in the back room gave out. Clara sighed, wrapped herself in a thick scarf, and went to grab a space heater. Before she could plug it in, James showed up, holding tools. "Let me," he said simply. Within 20 minutes, the heat was back. "You really can fix anything, huh?" she asked. James grinned. "I built a cabin once with my dad. Learned a few things." After that, she started leaving small tasks for him. Not because she needed the help, but because it gave her an excuse to keep him close. He never talked about what he'd left behind. Clara didn't ask. She'd learned to listen to the quiet ways people speak, how they show up, how they stay. James was showing her every day, without saying the words. One morning, as snow gently fell outside, Clara opened the shop to find James already there. Standing at the door with 2 coffees in hand, "I figured I'd bring you one for a change," he said, offering her the cup. She smiled, heart fluttering. "Thanks." They sat near the window that day, talking about books, old songs, and the places they'd never seen. He told her about a road trip he once took across the West, sleeping in his car and waking up beside lakes and mountains. "I used to think I needed noise around me to feel alive," he said. "But now I think I just needed stillness with the right person." Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just looked at him and felt her heart quietly say, "This is someone I could love." Later that week, he offered to repaint the back wall of the shop. The paint had started to chip, and Clara had mentioned it offhand once. He showed up with supplies, no questions asked, as they worked side by side with old jazz playing in the background. Their arms brushed, once accidental, but not insignificant. They both paused just for a second and then kept going. But the air had changed. The space between them was no longer just friendly. After the last coat of paint, they sat on the floor with coffee and sandwiches. Clara leaned her head against the wall, tired but content. "This place feels like a part of you," James said, looking around. "It is," she replied. "It saved me after everything." He nodded. "Funny, I think it's saving me too." They didn't talk about what they were to each other. No labels, no pressure. Just quiet companionship that kept deepening. But everyone around Clara began to notice a change. Her sister called one evening and said, "You sound lighter." Her friend at the coffee shop across the street asked, "Who's the guy with the steady smile?" Clara just laughed them off. She didn't know how to explain it, not because she was unsure, but because some things were too sacred for words. One Sunday, after the shop closed, James invited her to his cabin. She hesitated at first, but something in her heart said, "Go." The drive was short, the air crisp. His cabin was small but warm, filled with wood, books, and the smell of cedar. It looked like him, simple, grounded, real. They ate soup and sat by the fireplace, not saying much. Just being Dot. At one point, he reached out and took her hand gently. She didn't pull away. "You know," he said, eyes focused on the fire, "for a long time I thought I didn't have it in me to build anything real again. I thought I'd burned out." Clara looked at him. "And now?" He turned to her. "Now I think I just hadn't met the right person to build it with." Her heart beat faster, but she stayed still. She didn't want to break the moment. James leaned in slightly, then stopped. He didn't push. He waited. And that's when Clara realized this wasn't a man running from something. This was someone becoming something new, right in front of her. She leaned forward too, resting her head against his shoulder. They sat that way for a long time, saying nothing. Back in town, the snow kept falling. The days grew shorter, but Clara's heart grew lighter. She found herself humming more, smiling without realizing it. And every time James walked through the door, her world felt right again. There were still no confessions, no promises, just a people slowly learning to trust a feeling they both thought they'd lost long ago. One night, as they closed up the shop, James turned to her. "Clara," he said softly, "do you ever think about what this is? Between us." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "I do," she whispered. "More than I'd like to admit." He stepped closer. "Me too." There was no rush, no drama, just the quiet beginning of something real. And for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to hope, not just for love, but for a life where love could stay. Spring came quietly to Maplewood. The snow melted, the sidewalks cleared, and the trees slowly woke up with soft green leaves. Clara's bookshop opened its windows again, letting in fresh air and birdsong. Life moved on around her, but something inside her had already changed. James was no longer just the man who stopped by on rainy days. He was part of her life now, woven into her routines, her thoughts, her heart. He came by every morning, not just for coffee or conversation, but to be with her. He started helping her with bookkeeping, updating her website, even organizing events like poetry nights. Clara had always run the shop alone, but now it felt like theirs even, though they never called it that out loud. He didn't move in officially, but he stayed most nights. His jacket hung on the back of her door. His books sat on her nightstand. And when she made tea in the evenings, she made 2 cups without thinking. They never made a big declaration about their relationship. There was no dramatic kiss in the rain, no big moment. But it was real, solid, steady, growing stronger by the day. It was the kind of love that sneaks up on you when you're not looking. It's the kind you don't expect, but recognize when it finally arrives. Clara had been through enough to know how fragile things could be. She'd loved before. She'd lost before. But with James, it didn't feel risky. It felt right. Like peace. Like coming home. One afternoon in early May, James surprised her with a picnic behind the shop. He spread out an old quilt, packed sandwiches, strawberries, and sparkling water. They sat under a blooming dogwood tree, watching customers come and go from the bookstore, laughing like they had all the time in the world. Clara looked at him, at the lines near his eyes, the soft way he smiled when he was truly relaxed, and thought, "This is it. This is the life I didn't know I was waiting for." "I was thinking," James said, picking at a blade of grass. "Maybe I stay." "Like really stay?" Clara blinked. "You mean?" "No more cabin. No more drifting. I want to be here. With you." Her throat tightened. She didn't cry, but her heart swelled so full it felt like it might burst. "You're already here," she whispered. They didn't need anything more. No grand gestures. Just that quiet agreement between 2 people choosing each other every day. By summer, James had officially moved into her house. He converted the guest room into a reading room, built a new bookshelf by hand, and started growing herbs in the backyard. They cooked together, took walks after dinner, and spent slow Sunday mornings wrapped in blankets and conversation. There were no fireworks, no chaos. Just warmth, consistency. Joy in the simple things. Clara found herself laughing more, sleeping better. She no longer worried about what others might say, or if it was too late for her to fall in love again. Because the truth was, love had found her. In the middle of an ordinary life. In the middle of her quiet little town. Sometimes customers would ask, "Is that your husband?" When James helped at the register, she'd smile, not correcting them. Not because the title mattered, but because what they had was deeper than a label. They talked about the future once in a while, maybe a road trip, maybe buying a small piece of land. But they never rushed. They were both older now, more careful with their dreams. They knew what mattered was the present, the quiet breakfasts, the shared smiles, the comfort of knowing they weren't alone. One evening in early fall, almost a year after they met, Clara stood in the shop after closing, watching the sky turn pink through the window. James was in the back room fixing a squeaky drawer. She felt this wave of gratitude hit her so strong, it stopped her in place. A year ago, she was alone. Not broken, but quiet. Content, but tired. She never expected her life to change. Never imagined letting someone in again. But she had. And not just someone him. He was bigger than anything she had ever seen. Not in height or noise, but in spirit. In the way he made space for her. In the way he listened. In how he showed up day after day without asking for more than her time and trust. She remembered the first day he walked into her shop. Wetfromtherain.com, kind. A stranger. Now he was the love of her life. James walked out just then, wiping his hands. That drawer won't squeak anymore, he said, smiling. Clara walked over, wrapped her arms around him, and rested her head on his chest. What's that for? He asked softly. For showing up, she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. Always. Clara Henderson never expected much to change in her life. At 39, she had made peace with the quiet rhythm of her days. She owned a small bookshop on Main Street in Maplewood, Vermont, a cozy place with creaky floors, hand-picked novels, and the soft scent of coffee always floating in the air. Her world was peaceful, predictable, and just a little lonely. She wasn't unhappy, but there was a stillness in her life she no longer questioned. She had her routine: open the shop, greet the regulars, close up by 6. Head home to her tidy little house and heat up leftovers. She didn't expect surprises, and she didn't go looking for them. But then, one October afternoon, something or someone unexpected walked in. The rain had started just after noon. A soft drizzle at first, then a steady downpour that made the whole street shimmer. Clara was restocking a shelf near the front window when the door opened and the wind swept in with it. She looked up, and there he was. He didn't just enter the shop, he filled it. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a way that made her forget what she'd been doing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn brown leather jacket that clung to him like he'd lived 100 stories in it. His dark hair was damp, pushed back. And his eyes, a quiet kind of blue, scanned the room like he'd been searching for something without knowing what. He carried only a canvas backpack, no umbrella, no phone in hand. Just him and the storm behind him. Mind if I wait out the rain? He asked, his voice calm, deep, steady. Clara blinked, then nodded. Of course, she said, stepping aside. He smiled just enough to make it feel like a private moment. He moved toward the far end of the shop where the old armchairs sat near the poetry section and dropped his bag beside him. He picked up a book from the shelf like he'd done it 1,000 times before and began reading. Legs crossed, eyes focused. Clara returned to the counter, pretending to reorganize receipts, but in truth, she kept glancing at him. He wasn't like anyone she'd met in town. Most people in Maplewood either grew up there or moved in for a slower life. He looked like someone who had come from noise and lights and left it behind. There was something quiet but powerful about him. The kind of quiet that draws you in, not pushes you away. After a while, she walked over with a mug of coffee. It's not fancy, she said, but it's warm. He looked up, accepted the cup, and gave her a look that wasn't just thankful, it was kind. I'm James, he said, taking a sip. Thank you. Clara, she replied. They didn't talk much after that. He read, she continued with her work. But the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like sitting beside a stranger on a long train ride and somehow feeling safe. The hours passed. The rain slowed, and as the sky turned a soft gray blue, James stood and returned the book gently to the shelf. Thanks for the shelter, he said. Picking up his bag any time, she replied. And she meant it. He paused at the door, then looked back. Nice shop, he said. It has a soul. Clara smiled, not knowing why that sentence hit her the way it did. Then, just like that, he was gone, the bell above the door chiming behind him. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed thinking about the stranger with the quiet voice and the eyes that held stories. She wasn't someone who usually noticed things like that, or let herself imagine anything beyond her daily life. But James felt different. Not in a romantic way, not yet, but in a way that made her feel awake. Like someone had come in and shifted the air ever so slightly. The next morning she told herself it was nothing. A random visitor. A rainy day. That's all. But when she walked into the shop and saw the chair he sat in, the book still slightly out of place, she smiled without meaning to. She didn't expect to see him again. But the truth was, from that moment on, she kind of hoped she would. And in a town as small and steady as Maplewood, when you hope for something quietly, sometimes the universe listens. The story, it turns out, was only just beginning. James came back the next week. Clara was halfway through organizing the new shipment of novels when the bell above the door rang. She looked up, and there he was again. Same jacket, same calm expression. Like he belonged there. Still raining, he said with a small smile. She smiled back. Seems like it. He didn't explain why he came back. She didn't ask. He went to the same corner, picked up a different book this time, poetry again, and sat in the armchair like it had been waiting for him. After that, it became a quiet pattern. He never said when he'd show up, but he came often. Sometimes twice a week, sometimes once. He didn't talk much. He'd read, drink the coffee Clara gave him without asking, and sometimes they'd chat short, simple conversations. Nothing heavy. But something was building, slow and unspoken. Clara found herself waiting for him. Not in an obvious way, but in how she checked the weather forecast more often, made an extra cup of coffee without thinking, and always left the poetry shelf just a little bit untidy. One afternoon, they sat near the front of the store as soft music played from the old speaker by the register. It was quiet outside, just a few people walking by. James closed the book in his lap and looked at her. "This town is peaceful," he said. "You grew up here." She nodded. "Left for a while. Moved back after my mom passed." He didn't ask anything else. He just nodded, like he understood something without her saying it. "What about you?" she asked. He leaned back. "I used to live in Boston. Worked in architecture. Long hours. Tall buildings. Not much sleep." She waited. He paused, then added, "One day I just stopped wanting any of it. Sold most of my stuff, packed a bag, and started driving." "To where?" He shrugged. "Didn't know." "Still don't, really?" That was the longest he'd spoken so far. Clara felt something in her chest shift. She knew what it felt like to want to leave something behind. Even if you didn't say it out loud, she didn't press for more. And he didn't offer it. Their conversations stayed like that, honest, but never too deep. She learned he had a sister in Nova Scotia he hadn't spoken to in years. He learned she had been married once, a quiet marriage that ended without drama. Just the slow fading of something that never quite lit up. They never spoke about loneliness. But it was there, not heavy between them, just quietly understood. James became a familiar presence. He never crossed lines, never acted like he was entitled to her time. But when he smiled or leaned in to say something low and kind, Clara felt warmth bloom in places she'd thought were long gone. Once he stayed until closing. The shop was empty. Kara was locking the back door when she noticed he was still in the chair. "You're going to turn into part of the furniture." He smiled. "Wouldn't be the worst place to be." She turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the window lamps. The rain had started again. They stood at the door, watching it fall across the empty street. "You miss the city?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said. "But this is better." She looked at him, his profile outlined by the window light. He looked peaceful, grounded, and something about the moment felt different. Still quiet, but not just friendly. There was a pull between them, slow but real. He looked at her then, eyes steady. "You make this place feel like home," he said. Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. The words hit too close to something she hadn't let herself feel in years. So she just gave a small nod. Sometimes the most important feelings don't need a reply. From that day on, things changed. Not fast, not dramatic. But change. James started staying longer. They shared more coffee, more conversation. He told her about a cabin he was renting a few miles out of town. No internet, barely any phone signal. "It's good for the soul," he said. She started laughing more when he was around. Not because he told jokes, he rarely did, but because being near him made her feel light. Like she didn't have to hold her breath anymore. She didn't tell anyone about him. Not her friends, not her sister over in New York. It wasn't a secret. It's just something she wanted to keep in that quiet space between the two of them, untouched, still growing. Some days he wouldn't come in, and she'd feel a small drop in her chest. Not panic, just a missing piece. And when he did return, he'd say something simple like, "Needed a long walk today," or "got caught up in a book." And that would be enough. Clara wasn't used to needing anyone. She was strong, independent. But James didn't make her feel small for needing him. He made her feel safe doing it. One evening, they sat outside the shop on the wooden bench, the sun setting in warm orange streaks behind the trees. James looked up and said quietly, "You ever feel like you're not starting over, just continuing something that was always meant to find you?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Not because she was sad, but because deep down she knew what he meant. She didn't say anything, just reached over and touched his hand gently, and for the first time he held it. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The touch said enough. That night, as she lay in bed, her heart full and her mind quiet, Clara realized something. This, whatever it was between them, wasn't just comfort. It wasn't just friendship or passing time. It was something deeper, something waiting patiently for the right moment to bloom. They hadn't spoken the words, but sometimes love begins long before we name it. And neither of them was in a rush, because when something feels real, you don't need to force it. You just let it grow. Hat night, they sat on the front porch, the air cool, the stars just starting to shine. No words were needed. Just the quiet hum of crickets, the shared blanket over their legs, and the comfort of each other. Looking back now, Clara often says she never regrets letting him in. Not for 1 second. People ask her sometimes, "Weren't you scared letting someone into your life after so long?" And she always answers the same way. "Yes, I was. But I let him in anyway, and it was the best thing I ever did." Because love doesn't always come with loud declarations. Sometimes it arrives slowly, softly, like rain on an old roof, like the turning of seasons, like a man walking into a bookshop on an ordinary day, carrying nothing but a backpack and everything she never knew she needed. And that was the real beginning of everything.